A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So, we will start today with the story of the day. So, the story goes like this. Once a man goes to a god and then he asks, God, what is 1 million years for you? So, the god says, it's like a minute. Then the man says, God, then what is $1 million for you? Then the god says, it's like a penny. Then the man asks, then God, can you please give me a penny? Then God says, sure, wait a minute. So, so here, wait a minute means the man has to wait for 1 million years according to God. So, what the man was trying to do here was to be wise and get something out of God. But then, what the story shows is that nothing comes just free of cost here. For everything, for whatever you gain in this world, you have to work hard. So, as they say, that there is no elevator to success, you will have to take the stairs. So everything comes through hard work only, and nothing just comes just like that out of sheer luck. So, and there is also no shortcut to hard work. You have to take the long way, and that is how it is. So, hard work is a key to success. With this, we will move on to the first topic of the day, which is the state versus the private. Now, why this debate now? Um, Recently, because of the COVID crisis, it was seen that in various countries, how the state has taken centrality and how the state was trying to provide to the citizens all the medical care and the health requirements and also the social security which the poor and the vulnerable need at this point of time. So this has actually brought out a debate again that how far should we actually go back to a state-led development, or should we give importance to the market economy? So what have been some of the recent observations? In the case of United States also, the Chinese billionaire Jack Ma had sent a flight that contained 5.4 million face masks and nearly 60,000 protective face shields, 40,000 protective clothing. All this to the United States was sent by Jack Ma. So this shows how even the basic and the most critical healthcare components, for even that, the state has come to be dependent on the private sector. So this has been the state of affairs. And at this juncture, for instance, the French health minister has stated that the country may nationalize the vaccine companies if necessary. Spain has already nationalized its private hospitals. So there is a drive towards nationalization as against privatization. So, in this context, we see that even in the case of India, a Confederation of Indian Industry CII study has shown that India is dependent on China for nearly 70% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients. And in some cases, this dependence is even to the extent of 90% to 100%. So, this dependence on the private sector comes always at a cost. This has triggered a debate on the state versus the market. So, should it be state centric development or should it be market centric? So, when we talk about the state versus the market debate, usually we study in PubAd what actually is. What can be said to be state centric or what is market. So in that, any public or private is defined by three criteria. So one is the interest, the other is the access, and next is the agency. So this defines whether something is public or private. So if the interest being served is the interest of a particular person or a group of persons, then it is private. But if the interest served is of the people at large, then it is public. Similarly, access. So if the access to information, access to resources, access to the facilities is for the public, then it is public. Otherwise, for few people, it is private. And agency, nothing means ownership. So if the ownership is in the hands of few people, it is private. If it is in the hands of the public, it is public. So this is how we define public or private. Now, in the case of India, when we started off with our national progress after independence, we adopted a state-led development. So in which we had public sector enterprises for manufacture of various goods and services in the economy and for provision of all the services to the people. So And when we came to 1990s, it was seen that these public sector enterprises were not performing well, and they were becoming sick. And also because of the institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, we decided to open up our economy through the liberalization, privatization, globalization reforms. So now again we are coming back to a point where this state versus market debate is again going on. So at this point, let us see some of the positives and some of the negatives of having a market led development. Let's talk about the positives of a market led development. So, firstly, as we saw initially, we had PSCs, which were the commanding heights in the economy, and they were doing all the production work. So, these were performing very poorly. So, this is one reason. Second, when we talk about the private enterprises, there will not be any political or government interference in them. Thirdly, for any particular good or service, there will be a lot of private enterprises who will be providing the same. So, this will lead to competition. When you have competition, it will naturally mean that the resource efficiency will increase, the cost efficiency, it will be more cost effective. Therefore, citizens will get those goods and services at competitive prices. So this is another advantage. And when the private sector is engaged with most of the production of goods and services, the government can focus on the very important and strategic issues in the society and the economy. Then fourth, we will also have access to a wider global market. So this will also give us an access to a global market. And then because the private sector thrives on competition, it constantly needs to innovate. So it gives rise to more innovation, more research and development, and all that. And also when something is offered to the public free of cost through a public enterprise, it often leads to what is called as a free rider problem. But in the case of private, it doesn't happen like that. And earlier we used to say that private sector has a profit motive and all that, but now we see that even the private sector comes out and helps people. So this was seen in the case of the Tatas and Azim Premji during the COVID crisis, how they have come forward to contribute thousands of crores. So this corporate social responsibility and all is there. So it doesn't mean that the private sector is solely profit oriented. So these are all some of the positives of privatization. Now let us or positives of having a market led development. Now let us see a few negatives. So first of all, as they work on profit motive, there is no service orientation for the private sector. This is one thing. And also because the here whatever services will come at a cost, not everybody will be able to afford those services. So there will definitely be some haves and there will definitely be some haves not. So this will create a more economic gap in the economy, and therefore it doesn't lead to an inclusive development. It will lead to inequity in the economy. Okay, all right. Then, when the private sector is there, then it could definitely lead to private monopolies. So, we can see these monopolies in the telecom companies, for instance. And for people working in the private companies, there is no job security. In the case of these public enterprises are formulated under legislations, so in which there will be more accountability to the government and to the parliament or to the people. But in the case of the market, the accountability is very poor. So accountability is poor here. So because of all these things, we were in the worldwide, it has seen that there is a reverse trend. For example, there had been municipalization of water supply in several countries. There have been privatization of water supply in several countries, but now they are being municipalized because when the private sector was asked to supply water, then it was seen that several poor and the vulnerable sections were not getting good quality water supply. Similarly, even in the Europe, several the train services were privatized, but this led to a lot of fragmentation, and then it had to be nationalized back again. So similarly, you can see the inefficiencies with respect to private insurance, the private sector banks, and all this. So in this context, our metro man E. Sridharan had commented that this will lead to a social cleavage. So it will lead to a difference in the haves and the haves not, and it will create a more inequitable economic scenario. So this is some of the analysis with respect to the state versus market debate. But at the end of the day, what is important is that the state definitely should be strong in some of the critical basic things like health, education, defense, and all that, and the private sector can take up the rest. And also there must be very good regulation, optimum amount of regulation. Economic survey once told that there is a regulatory cholesterol, so that must not be the case. The regulation, the amount of it should be very optimum, and it should be optimum. At the same time, we must have more public and private sector corporations. That is a way to go forward. Now we'll go to the next topic, which is India-US defense partnership. So recently, the United States State Department has approved two missile deals with India. One is for the Harpoon air-launched missiles, and the other is for the round lightweight torpedoes. So these two deals have now been approved. These two are the missiles, and the deals have been approved now. So this is the latest development in the India-United States defense partnership. So when we talk of defense partnership, we must also know that United States has declared India as a major defense partner. Then also in the recently Donald Trump had visited India in the month of February. So there a $3 billion agreement was signed for American helicopters, or the Ramco helicopters. Then we have also been signing some foundational agreements, and the recently COMCASA. COMCASA means it's a foundational military agreement where it involves sharing encrypted communication and equipments. So that is also there. Then we have a 2+2 defense and foreign ministers dialogue is also there. Then United States has always considered India to be an integral part of the Pacific narrative. So by conceptualizing of the Quad. So these are all some of the India-US defense ties, and keep this updated as and when you see the news in the newspapers. So this is it for this topic. The next is about poverty in India. Why this is in news is because now, because of the COVID crisis, several people have to be tested. But and also recently Supreme Court has specified that free testing must be done in the private labs for some of the poor and the vulnerable. So how to select the poor and the vulnerable? So it was decided that nearly 10.7 crore such families, which are covered under the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which means the Ayushman Bharat, they will be getting free tests in the private laboratories. But the National Health Authority, which is actually responsible for implementing Ayushman Bharat, it said that over 2 crore families are actually missing from the list of households which qualify for Ayushman Bharat, the list of people according to the SECC Socioeconomic Caste Census 2011. So nearly 2 crore families from this list are actually missing, who can get benefits under this, and who can actually get free testing. So this shows that how a particular list, a socioeconomic caste census to measure poverty, to identify people who are below the poverty line, has been very inefficient. And it is not just this case, even even before also, how to measure poverty has been constantly debated in India. So let's see some of the basic things related to this. The first time when poverty was measured was by Dadabhai Naoroji before independence, in the book Poverty and Un-British Rule of India. So there it was computed to be rupees 16 to rupees 35. So per capita per year, so that was computed before independence. After independence, we had some important committees. For instance, we had the YK Alak committee, so in which based on the calorie intake, the poverty line was decided. So this was decided at 2100 kilocalories for urban areas and 2400 for rural areas. And but it did not consider the other things like health or education, because the committee assumed that health, education, etc. will be taken care by the state governments only. So the next important committee was the Lakdawala committee. So this actually included both health and education were also included in this. Then the next important committee was maybe the Tendulkar committee, in which there was actually a shift from measuring poverty based on calorie to the nutritional outcome. So there was a shift in this, and it also included health, education, even transport and electricity also were included in this. So accordingly, nearly 27 rupees for rural areas and 33 rupees for urban areas for spending per individual. Based on this, it was decided the poverty line, and accordingly 21.9% of Indian population was considered to be poor. So then came the Rangarajan committee. So this actually considered the monthly consumption expenditure. So this was actually daily consumption, and Rangarajan committee considered the monthly consumption expenditure per person. So accordingly, nearly 972 rupees for the rural households and 1407 for the urban households was fixed as the poverty line, and nearly 29.5% of the Indian population were considered to be poor. And also when we talk about poverty, we see that the other day we saw what Amartya Sen's view on poverty is. So poverty by different people have been viewed differently. Amartya Sen says that poverty is not just a lack of money, but it is a lack of capability to develop one's full potential. So that actually is poverty. Also, recently I was reading this book, Poor Economics, by the Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo. So, where they say that poverty depends upon the cognitive choices that people make. So, it talks about behavioral economics, how a decision that a person makes also determines how whether the person is poor or rich. They give an example. They give actually several examples. For example, if a person knows that buying mosquito net is actually can help him prevent him from having diseases like malaria or dengue, etc. But if these mosquito nets are given for free, then the person will take and use it. But if he has to make a choice to purchase a mosquito net, then that the person will not do, because it is very difficult for them to understand that this purchasing one mosquito net actually has long term monetary benefits as well. So several studies have been done, and it was found that if a person invests in a mosquito net, then he will not get any diseases from mosquitoes like malaria or dengue, and this translates into more number of working days and labor days in the year, and this will all translate into higher income levels. But a poor person is not able to see that far, and he makes a decision based on the facts at that particular point of time, and he does not see any he does not know the importance of buying the mosquito net. So this is how there will these cognitive choices will also have an impact on poverty. So about this, you can read more in the book Poor Economics. It offers very good insights. Okay, the next we come to is the cyber frauds. So during COVID, there have been a rise in the cyber frauds. So here are few examples that you can quote of the different types of cyber frauds that are happening these days. So firstly, several of us are now ordering our essential things online, even the medicines online. So all of a sudden, several e-commerce platforms are coming, and these are all fraudulent, who are just tricking people to order things online, and they are just taking our money. So this is one way in which the cyber frauds are happening. The second is that now many people are using the Zoom app, because the Zoom app allows up to 100 people to together have some meetings or anything. So but what is happening is that this Zoom app, it is accessing the user's microphone, webcam and data storage also. So this has given rise to privacy concerns, and unnecessary data from the user is being collected by the app. So this might lead to loss of private data also. And apart from that, there is what is called as Zoom raiding or Zoom bombing, in which hate speech or even pornographic content are suddenly displayed on the video call on Zoom. So all of these things are happening. And another thing that is happening is recently that was noticed is that PM Cares contribution. So the UPI ID given was PM Cares at SBI, but another similar looking UPI was circulated, and money was being collected from people. So that ID appeared as PM PM hyphen cares, something like that, which was very similar. And it is very difficult to notice the slight change in the UPI IDs while one decides to contribute. So all of these different types of cyber frauds are now happening. So you can quote them whenever there's a question on cyber fraud, that in the recent times during COVID, there was an increase and these types of frauds were happening. All right, the next is about the efficacy of e-government initiatives. So recently you all know that we have this app called as Arogya Setu, so in which you can download it and then you can have a self-diagnosis on the app, and it also helps in contact tracing, and it will also give us an alert when we are in proximity to someone who may or have contacted the disease. But what is happening with this wonderful app is that it requires our GPS and our phone's Bluetooth to be switched on all the time for this app to work. But Indians are very much conscious of the data that is getting consumed and all this, because the data doesn't come free of cost. And also when we keep our GPS and Bluetooth on, the battery life is very little, very small. So battery will go, the mobile will discharge soon. So we are concerned about that also. So because of all this, several of us are not downloading the app and not using it. So in this case, even though such apps are designed for the benefit of the people, it is not leading to the desired outcome or the desired result. So in this case, we have to think of the ways by which people can be nudged to, or people can be made to download the apps and use these e-government initiatives. So one very good way by which this can be done was given in the article, in the editorial. It said that with this Arogya Setu app, you combine other things also, like for example giving passes and approvals for movement to the people during and after the lockdown, and the app can even host other health related features. So all of these will make more number of people to download the app, and that is when the efficacy of this app will improve. So this way we have to adopt this approach of integration, and only then e-government initiatives will be more successful. So this is one example for that. So next is IMF growth forecast. The IMF has recently released its World Economic Outlook, and according to which it has projected a growth of 1.9% for India in the year 2020, and this is going to be 7.4% in 2021. And it is saying that in 2021, when India grows at 7.4%, the world economy is projected to grow at 5.8% in 2021. Also, it has said that the cumulative loss of GDP in 2020 and 2021 from this pandemic could be nearly $9 trillion, and this $9 trillion is greater than the economy of Japan and Germany combined. So this is going to be the loss. So this is an important data which you must remember for the exam. So we will discuss yesterday's question. The question was to critically analyze the relevance of GDP in measuring a country's progress. So first we will have to say what GDP is and give its definition. Then we will have to say what is the importance of GDP, why we must continue to have GDP as a metric. So then we must say why GDP may not be all that relevant. Then the way forward as in what can we have along with or in to complement GDP. So what all we must have, so that we must tell. So this has to be the structure of the answer. So first let us see the importance of GDP. So GDP actually talks about the size of the economy, so how the economy is performing. So whether the economy is performing good or is it a bad. So it actually gives an indicator of the economic health of the economy. Then secondly, GDP actually helps us to determine what should be our fiscal and monetary policy. So these policies depend upon the GDP figures. So this enables our policymakers and the central banks to judge whether the economy is expanding or whether the economy is contracting, whether whether the economy needs a boost or should we restrain the economy, or if there is a recession in the economy or if there is an inflation. So all of these will be determined, and fiscal and monetary policies can be drawn up based on the GDP figures. And based on the GDP figures, it also helps the investors. So investors look at the GDP figures to decide where they have to put their money. Even the governments decide uh, based on the GDP figures. It helps them to shape their policy and decide how much of public spending could be affordable to them. So this is all the importance of GDP. So next we have to see why GDP may not be all that relevant, or GDP alone may not be all that relevant in today's world. The first thing is that GDP does not cover the non-material aspects. So for example, in United States, the per capita income is high, the GDP is very high, but however, uh, the crime rates were high in United States. So GDP does not account for all these. So similarly, crime rates, even in the case of India, access to food, access to education, all of these things are not considered in GDP. Similarly, what is your level of happiness? There is a gross happiness, there is a happiness index as well. So this what is the level of happiness, what is the level of satisfaction in the population, and what about ecology, how far is development sustainable, and how far it takes care of the environment and the ecology. And development also means, according to Amartya Sen says that development also means it is a process of expanding the freedoms of people. So development means it is a process of expanding the real freedoms that people enjoy. That is development according to Amartya Sen. So in such and such a case, what is the level of freedom that is available to the people? So whether it relates to the press, whether it relates to expressing one's views, whether it relates to dissent, even social media, so whatever it is, what is the level of freedom that people enjoy? So depending on the level of freedom enjoy, also development has to be measured, but GDP doesn't consider all that. Similarly, GDP doesn't consider the inequality and inequity that is present in the economy. So because of all these, we can conclude that GDP may not alone be sufficient to measure the growth of the country. So it is because of all these we have other indicators like the Human Development Index, the Human Capital Index, we have a Social Progress Index, we have SDGs and MDGs, we have a Happiness Index, we have Gross National Happiness of Bhutan. So these are some of the metrics, and a combination of all these will actually help to determine what is the nature and level of progress of the country. But it doesn't mean that we can completely do away with the GDP, because GDP is still a measure to compare the countries at the international level, how they are performing, to make investment decisions, to make policy decisions, as we discussed. But at the same time, it is not sufficient. It is necessary, but is not sufficient. We need to supplement it with other metrics as well. So now today's question is, as I just told about the what Amartya Sen's view on poverty is, that is the question for you today. Poverty is a lack of capability to use one's full potential, by Amartya Sen. So you have to comment on the statement. This is again a 15 marker question which has to be answered in 250 words. So that's all for today. Thank you.